It was Christmas Eve, and the snow was melting off my Skywatch flight suit onto the lake house floor, the floor I'd paid for. My father, Mark, clinked a champagne flute under the 12-foot fake tree. My sister, Lena, aimed her phone at me, broadcasting live. Then the bomb dropped. Dad had sold this house out from under me to settle Lena's massive debt. They expected me to scream. I didn't. I just reached into my duffel bag and pulled out the thin black files. I looked at the couple on my sofa, their housewarming mugs still steaming. Did my father happen to mention the fake second mortgage and the federal regulations he violated? I asked quietly. Because before this party ends, you're all going to know who the real owner of this place is. The smell of wet wool and pine hit me first, followed by the cloying sweetness of fake gingerbread from the air diffuser. I stood at the threshold of the house on Silver Pine Lake in Maple Ridge, Colorado, the dark blue material of my Skywatch Rescue Command flight suit soaking through at the shoulders. Outside, the blizzard had backed off to a lazy, sleeting snow, but the grit still clung to my boots. Each step I took let melted snow dribble onto the reclaimed hardwood floor, the floor I'd spent 2 years saving up for. The floor I had spent 3 weeks installing with my own 2 hands last fall. Christmas carols were blasting, some Mariah Carey deep cut, loud enough to rattle the cheap glass champagne flutes they were using. The air was thick with the scent of cheap plastic champagne, stale office party dips, and the over-eager perfume of my extended family and neighborhood acquaintances, about 30 of them, mostly people I only saw when they needed to brag about me at the annual holiday party. I was the spectacle, the guest of honor, freshly returned from 7 months detached duty in the Bering Sea. They were staring at my uniform, the heavy-duty Skywatch patch, the silver diver wings, the faint, indelible salt stains near the cuffs. It was the uniform of the daughter who saved strangers while the rest of them saved seats at the dinner table. Behind the crowd, standing sentinel beneath an aggressively decorated 12-foot artificial Christmas tree, were my father, Mark Burns, and my sister, Lena. They looked like the hosts of a reality TV reunion special, basking in the glow of the flickering white LED lights. Mark, in a dark wool blazer that probably cost $2,000 he couldn't afford, held a spoon and was tapping a cut crystal glass that definitely wasn't ours. Lena, meanwhile, was a shimmering, kinetic disaster in a red sequined dress that looked like it belonged on a Vegas stage, not a quiet Colorado living room. Her left hand held her phone high, the ring light reflecting off her wide, performative eyes. I watched Mark clear his throat, an old theatrical habit, his face settling into the familiar mask of the sacrificing patriarch. All right, can I have everyone's attention for just a moment? Mark's voice boomed, thick with the kind of false gravitas he saved for weddings and funerals, or, apparently, this. We've got our hero, Cassidy, back home for the holidays. Everyone give a huge round of applause for my girl, risking her life for all of us. The applause was dutiful, slightly drunken, and the smell of champagne intensified. I didn't move past the entryway, keeping the duffel bag slung low across my body. I knew what was coming next, though they thought I didn't. I'd come home 1 week earlier than planned. Mark held up his hands to silence the crowd, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. Now, Cassidy, he said, addressing me with an almost painful amount of warmth. You've been through a hell of a lot these last 7 months. He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle, as if he personally felt the wind chill from the Arctic patrols. And a good father knows when his daughter needs a break, knows when to step up and make the hard choices so she doesn't have to. He took a theatrical sip of his drink. Lena edged closer, her phone camera fixed on me, the live indicator glowing red in the corner of her screen. Then came the bombshell, wrapped up neatly in holiday ribbon. Sss. I took care of things, Mark announced, his voice suddenly loud, proud, and slightly breathless. Cassidy won't have to worry about this house anymore. Folks, because I've signed the papers, I sold it. The room held its breath for a beat of uncomfortable silence. waiting for the punchline. "And I did it," Mark continued, his chest puffing out. "To wipe clean Lena's debt. A good father steps in when one daughter is irresponsible, and the other is too busy saving the world to notice she doesn't need all this burdensome property." A few nervous titters started up, quickly turning into scattered, confused applause. Mark beamed, playing the family hero who had sacrificed property value for personal rescue. And then Lena delivered the knockout blow, her voice chirpy and amplified by the phone's microphone. She leaned in, turning the camera to get a tight shot of my face. "That's right, guys. Daddy saved the day," she cooed to her unseen followers. "And my big sister, Cassidy, finally learns what a financial consequence feels like, right? This one's for the content." She punctuated her sentence with a practiced, bright, #ready smile, transforming my shock and my life's work into a piece of digital gossip for her channel. The atmosphere shifted from party merriment to morbid curiosity. I could see the varying emotions on the faces of the 30-odd guests. There was the forced, gallows humor of the relatives who always hated my independence, the eager anticipation of neighbors waiting for the inevitable explosion, and the whispered validation. "Mark's such a sacrificial father," I heard one woman hiss to her husband, who nodded wisely, convinced Mark was simply saving Lena from the debt trap created by her online pursuits. They expected me to rage, to cry, to drop the bag and start screaming about stolen equity and betrayal. They expected the emotional fallout of a daughter whose entire sense of stability had just been obliterated in one drunken public declaration. I didn't give them any of it. I placed my heavy, sodden duffel bag, containing everything I currently owned, including my emergency flare kit and my dive watch, down onto the reclaimed hardwood. The sound was a soft thud that somehow felt louder than the absent music. I unzipped my flight suit, shrugged out of the top half, and tied the arms around my waist. Underneath, I wore a perfectly clean, thin gray thermal shirt. My face felt tight. I remembered the last time my face felt like this. 2 weeks ago, hanging 60 feet below the belly of a helicopter, the wind shear threatening to turn me into a human pendulum, the waves crashing 20 feet high, and the knowledge that if I missed the fisherman, he was dead. You learn to compartmentalize. You learn to breathe slow. You learn that panic is the only thing that kills you. I walked 3 slow steps into the room, the smile I gave them feeling eerily calm. It was the same smile I used to reassure a terrified survivor clinging to a sinking hull. The room went silent. Everyone was waiting for the fire, but they got ice. "That's funny, Dad," I said, my voice low and conversational, completely steady. I bypassed the champagne and picked up a bottle of sparkling water from the countertop. I took a slow sip. "Are you all completely certain that you have, in fact, sold my house?" My question hung in the air, mocking the finality of Mark's announcement. Before anyone could reply, before Mark could even muster his indignant, "Who do you think you are talking to?" look, I reached into the flight suit jacket I draped over the duffel bag. I pulled out a thin black document folder. It was filled not with documents, but with printouts, emails, district records, affidavits, and screenshots, all stapled neatly. My eyes swept past my family and landed on the couple sitting on my sofa. They were in the prime seats, enjoying the show, cradling those cheap mugs that still had the housewarming script on them. This was Tessa and Brody Ward. They looked utterly bewildered, blinking in the sudden shift of tension. I walked directly towards them, ignoring Mark's sharp intake of breath and Lena's whispered, "What is she doing?" I stopped in front of Brody, who was starting to sweat under the Christmas lights. "Tessa? Brody?" I asked, my voice still dangerously soft. "Did my father happen to tell either of you about the second mortgage, the $160,000 home equity line of credit he fraudulently opened in my name, and the federal laws he trampled on when he used my deployment orders to circumvent the signature verification process?" Tessa's hand, holding the mug, started to tremble violently. The cheap ceramic slipped, hitting the hardwood with a loud, sickening thwack and splintering into 3 large pieces. The coffee, or whatever hot beverage it was, spread across the floor I had paid for. The silence that followed was total, heavy, and absolute, crushing the festive noise that had just been there. I looked back at Mark, who had gone gray under the tan he'd probably gotten at a tanning booth. I looked at Lena, whose phone was still broadcasting, now silent, capturing the shock of everyone else. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to cry. I just opened the black folder. Before this evening ends, I promised, the sound barely a whisper that every single person in the room strained to hear. Every single person here will know who the rightful owner of this house is, and who, exactly, just lit their own financial life on fire for $90,000. My gaze was locked on the petrified faces of the wards, but my target was Mark and Lena. The calm in my eyes was the calm of the sea after the storm has passed, revealing the wreckage underneath. I let the scene hold there, the icy stillness of my face contrasting with the rapidly paling skin of my father and sister, before the light cuts abruptly back, 7 months earlier, to the precise moment the betrayal was first signed into existence. 7 months earlier. The bitter air of the Alaska coast felt like needles on my skin. I was sitting on a cold metal bench in the cavernous maintenance hangar of the North Shore Air Station. The massive hangar doors were slightly ajar for ventilation, and the wind outside was a relentless, high-pitched whine that drowned out everything but the jet engine parts scattered around me. I had just finished an 8-hour cold water survival drill. My body ached down to the bone marrow. I propped my phone against a heavy toolbox and initiated the video call. Mark's face appeared, filling the screen with the warm, golden light of the Colorado living room. He was reclined deep into my oversized leather armchair, the one I'd gotten with my first substantial bonus after paying off my student loans, looking utterly relaxed. The image itself felt wrong. I was 4,000 miles away, breathing jet fuel and salt, and he was lounging in my sanctuary. "There she is, the Ice Queen," Mark said, without waiting for me to speak. His tone was cheerful, breezy, like he was calling from a golf course, not my house. In the background, Lena moved into the frame, posing dramatically. She was holding a brand-new, designer-branded suitcase, the kind you saw on influencer feeds, not in actual transit. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, and her voice was a high-pitched sing-song. "Say hi to the camera, Dad's followers," Lena called out, tagging the luggage company and another vague, aspirational brand with her phone. "We're manifesting abundance, heading out on a creative retreat to get the content juices flowing. Love you, Cass. Tell us about the polar bears later." Before I could process the image of my sister heading off on a luxury trip paid for by an invisible revenue stream, Mark cut in. "Look, honey, I know you're tired," he said, but his eyes were already glazing over, looking past me. "I just needed to confirm the transfer went through. Lena's got a huge opportunity here, a real 6-figure potential. But she's got to look the part. You know how the algorithms are." I rubbed the back of my neck, the exhaustion making my voice flat. "The transfer of the $3,000? Yes, I sent it this morning, after my shift ended, like you asked. What was it for, exactly? You said emergency debt last time, and now it's a creative retreat?" Mark waved his hand dismissively, the same gesture he used when swatting away a pesky fly. "Details, Cassidy, details. It's all investment in her brand. A father has to facilitate. And look at you, getting that amazing danger pay. The bank account is overflowing. Your job is basically a bottomless well of overtime for us, isn't it?" He laughed, a deep, easy sound that used to make me feel safe, but now sounded predatory. He never failed to frame my hard-earned, high-risk compensation as a kind of infinite allowance for the family. My danger pay was just money that needed to be put to proper use, which apparently meant Lena's relentless pursuit of online fame. This small, insidious pattern had been going on for months. It started as a plea. "Just help Lena pay the minimum on this one credit card. She got confused by the interest rates." Then it escalated to, "Can you send $800 for a professional-grade camera? The iPhone just isn't cutting it for quality content." The requests were always framed with urgency and always for Lena's sake. Deposits for influencer boot camps that were perpetually postponed or canceled. Quick cash for networking events that yielded nothing but Instagram stories of expensive cocktails. I transferred the money from cramped, chaotic locations, a tiny break room in the dead of the 2 a.m. night shift, hunched over my phone on the cold, vibrating floor of a stationary helicopter, or sitting alone in my tiny barrack room. I was always too far, too tired, and too dependent on the few minutes of phone contact to start a real fight. Family is what you rely on, I would tell myself, trying to soothe the deep unease in my stomach. They would never actually cross a line. A week later, the stakes got higher. I was pulled into the administrative office at the North Shore Air Station. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. A young administrative officer, looking stressed and overworked, slid a thick stack of deployment papers across the desk. "Sign here, please. Chief Burns," the officer instructed quickly. "These are your protocols, equipment manifests, liability waivers, standard 7-month package." Tucked within the stack was a document titled Durable Power of Attorney. "And this one," the officer pointed with a chipped fingernail, "is just a boilerplate for next of kin. It allows your father to handle small, routine domestic matters while you're deployed to a high-risk area. Think utility bills, property tax payments, making sure the lawn gets mowed. Just the little housekeeping stuff so you don't have to worry about the mail pileup." I glanced at the paragraph, granting Mark Burns full authority to manage real and personal property, including but not limited to financial transactions and routine maintenance. It seemed logical. I was about to spend half a year focused entirely on survival and rescue missions, often without reliable communication. Who would pay the electricity bill or handle the annual property tax assessment? I trusted Mark. I had always trusted him. When my mother passed, he gave me the keys to her old car, saying he knew I needed the stability. When we sold the old family home, he was meticulous about the division of assets. He was the constant, the anchor. He would never compromise the one major thing I had built for myself, my home equity. I signed the power of attorney quickly, barely lifting the pen from the paper, my mind already on the gear inspection I needed to complete before the next mission briefing. The ink dried instantly, a legal commitment that felt as casual as signing for a parcel delivery. That evening, over bland institutional pasta in the air station mess hall, I mentioned the papers to Mara Quinn. Mara was a former Skywatch diver who had transitioned to working as a lawyer for a fictional military legal aid office. She was sharp, cynical, and deeply loyal. Mara was cleaning her glasses with a paper napkin. She didn't look up. "A durable power of attorney. Cassidy? You gave him that?" "Yeah, just for bills and taxes while I'm offshore," I replied, shrugging. "It's boilerplate." She finally looked up, her expression serious. "Boilerplate or not, Cass, giving someone that kind of power is handing over the keys to your entire life. It means your signature is interchangeable with theirs. You are putting everything you own in their hands." I laughed it off, taking a large bite of overcooked spaghetti. "Come on, Mara, it's my dad. He's not one of those people." I truly believed it. I truly believed he had boundaries, that the endless requests for Lena were annoying, yes, but fundamentally benign. The image freezes on the copy of the document in the administrative file. My signature, Cassidy Burns, perfectly legible on the line granting sweeping authority. The pen paused for a fraction of a second, the point hovering over the paper. Before I pressed down firmly, that insignificant moment, the casual stroke of the pen, was the legal mistake that would unravel my entire world. A few months later, I was sitting at a crowded international airport, waiting for a short layover flight to my next deployment area. I had a rare 30-minute break and opened my real estate app, Zillow, just for a bit of escapism. It was a habit. Checking the Maple Ridge market, watching the equity grow, feeling the satisfaction of my sacrifice turning into tangible wealth. Out of sheer habit, I typed in the address of my own lake house. The very first result, complete with professional real estate staging photos, was my home. It was tagged, Under contract, backup offers accepted. The slow, creeping dread was already starting to form in my chest, a cold knot tightening around my lungs. The game was over. The nightmare had begun. The airport lounge was a chaotic blend of muffled announcements and the drone of forced corporate cheer. I was on a 30-hour layover between assignments, the kind of brutal, time-zone-shredding transit that left your senses numb. My ritual, my little pocket of sanity, was to check the property values back in Maple Ridge. It was the only way I could feel tethered to the life I was building, a reward for the isolation. I scrolled through the Zillow app, my thumb dragging across the screen. I typed in my address, 1722 Silverpine Lake Road, as a reflex. The screen refreshed. The air seemed to evacuate my lungs. There it was, my house, not as a comparable sale, but as an active listing. The primary photo, professionally staged, showed the living room bathed in unnatural light. Under contract, backup offers accepted. I froze, the noise of the terminal receding into a distant hum. My chest tightened, a familiar pressure, like being pinned under a collapsed bulkhead. No, this is a mistake, a listing error. I frantically swiped through the images. My bedroom had been stripped bare. The custom-built cedar shelving unit I had spent 3 weekends on was gone. The kitchen looked sterile, scrubbed of all my life. No coffee maker, no mismatched mugs, no evidence of my existence. The description text glowed like a malicious taunt. Motivated seller, ready for quick close, perfect starter home with lake views. Motivated seller. The phrase echoed in the suddenly very cold air. I stabbed the call button for Mark. Once, twice, 5 times in a row, each time. His smooth, recorded voice routed me straight to voicemail, talking about how busy he was in his retirement project. The urgency that had fueled his calls for cash was suddenly absent. I switched to messaging Lena. A quick, brutal text. What is happening with the house? Answer your phone now. The confirmation popped up instantly. Read. The reply never came. The silence on the other end was more deafening than any scream. The panic, the raw, emotional terror of financial violation, lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then, the years of high-stakes training kicked in. Panic doesn't save lives. Procedure does. I instantly shifted into mission mode. I took screenshots of every page of the listing. I downloaded the listing sheet and saved the file to my encrypted tablet. I scrolled to the bottom and found the agent's information. Derek Holcomb. Derek. I remembered him. A greasy, overly cheerful guy Mark used to bowl with, always talking about his hot new listings and how Mark should invest with him. I needed air support. I needed legal ordnance. I pulled up my secure messaging app and typed Mara Quinn's name. Mara was the former Skywatch crew chief turned military legal aid lawyer I had met during training. She was the only person I trusted who understood both the language of high-risk deployment and the Byzantine language of property law. I sent the listing image and the exact address. My message was curt, clinical. Is a durable power of attorney, signed for purposes of paying taxes and utilities while deployed, sufficient authorization for the named agent to secretly sell the primary residence of an active duty service member? Immediate response required. Mara's reply pinged in less than a minute. She must have been sitting at her desk. Her tone was all business. Zero emotion. No, absolutely not. Not unless there is extremely specific language granting that authority. And even then, federal law protects service members from foreclosures, eviction sale. While deployed. This sale is likely contingent on blatant fraud. Need copies of the POA and any communication regarding the sale. The clock is ticking. Cassidy. Fraud. The word confirmed the depth of the treachery. I moved from the chaos of the main terminal to a desolate, dimly lit charging station near an unused gate. I pulled up my personal email and started digging. I searched Mark's name. I searched for documents related to the house. It didn't take long. Amidst the forwarded utility bills and the property tax assessment forms I expected, I found a digital file dated 4 months ago. It was a complete HELOC application. Home equity line of credit, the signature line, digitized and neatly aligned, carried my name, my digital signature, the same one Mark had access to through the POA. The principal amount? $160,000. My hands started to shake. The sale wasn't just about settling Lena's debt. It was about covering up a massive, fraudulent loan Mark had taken out against my equity, using my service status as a tool to bypass verification. He hadn't just sold my house, he had mortgaged it into oblivion first. As if sensing the depth of the sinkhole I had just fallen into. My phone chimed. It was Mara. She had pulled the preliminary records from the county clerk's office using the property ID I sent. I have the preliminary closing package. The HELOC is listed, but the agent, Holcomb, failed to disclose several key federal protections that apply to you. He used the POA to secure the line, drew on 70% of it, and then sold the house quickly to erase the debt. The betrayal was now meticulously tracked, digitally verified, and sealed with official county stamps. The rest of that long night, in that cold, loud airport, became a silent war room. As the boarding calls for other flights rang out, I meticulously constructed the case against my own family on my small tablet. I downloaded all 6 months of bank statements, highlighting every transfer to Mark. The $300 for Lena's studio lighting, the $700 for the retreat deposit, the $2,000 he claimed was for a new roof that never happened. Every line of text, every date, every wire transfer stacked up into a towering edifice of deceit. It wasn't just about Lena's laziness. It was about Mark weaponizing my sense of filial duty and my military status for his own convenience and to cover his own debt, which he framed as Lena's need. Mara sent her final, brutal warning just as my boarding gate was announced. The tone was clipped, the message underlined with all capital letters. The title company is ready to finalize the sale in 48 hours. They think you're stuck overseas and silent. You have to get home. Cassidy, you have to be there to sign the affidavit in person and file the injunction. If you wait, the deal will close, the money will be dispersed, and the legal mess will be 10 times harder to untangle. I looked at the gate, Flight 380 to my remote post. I looked at my tablet. The final documents being prepared to legally strip me of my most valuable asset. I closed the app, secured the files, and walked away from the boarding gate. There were bigger storms to face than the ones over the ocean. I was going home. The chief commander's office at the Alaskan Forward Operating Base was stark, sterile, and blindingly white. I sat across the stainless steel desk. The paperwork for my emergency leave request spread out before me. The commander, a gruff woman named Reynolds who had seen me pull a fisherman from a collapsing ice floe, simply watched me. I told her everything, but stripped of all emotion. I spoke in the clipped, professional cadence of a post-mission report. Fraudulent use of durable power of attorney, establishment of a $160,000 home equity line of credit, unauthorized and unregistered with the proper military legal aid, immediate need to file an injunction against a pending, non-disclosed sale of primary residence. My hands, resting on the smooth, cold surface of the desk, were shaking slightly, an almost imperceptible tremor that belied the absolute calm of my voice. I was reporting on my own life as if it were a failed mission objective. Commander Reynolds leaned back. She didn't ask about why my father would do it, or how my sister was involved. She just looked at the stack of evidence I had quickly compiled. She knew the difference between a real crisis and a distraction. She picked up her pen, signed the emergency leave form with a decisive flourish, and pushed the paperwork back. "Go, Chief Burns," she said, her voice firm. "Get out there and resolve what you can. And remember, you deserve more than this." Her final words were a quiet, powerful acknowledgement of the deep, personal violation I was facing. My journey home became a blur of pressurized cabins and stale airport air. It was a brutal, 40-hour transit of cramped coach seats, where my knees hit the seat in front of me, and sleep came in brief, adrenaline-laced snatches. My heavy duffel bag was wedged under the seat. a constant reminder of the life I'd paused. On the tiny, shuddering screen of my laptop, while the plane bucked through turbulence, I kept the legal documents open. The HELOC application, Mara's notes, the county filing dates. The flight path was taking me physically closer to home, but the digital trail was pulling me deeper into the cold, calculated reality of betrayal. On the airline speakers, the same saccharine Christmas songs followed me from airport to airport, turning the season of cheer into an ironic, mocking soundtrack. At my connecting stop in Denver, I found a print shop tucked away near baggage claim, huddled next to a power outlet. I printed the evidence. I created a physical timeline, using different colored sticky notes to map out the conspiracy. Mark's name linked to the fraudulent HELOC drawdowns, Lena's name connected to the corresponding messages asking for cash for her retreats and equipment. Derek Holcomb's name tied to the non-disclosure of the HELOC and my military status on the closing contract. The whole criminal flowchart was pinned up in a dark corner, a tangible horror on cheap paper. I made a crucial call to the title company that was handling the closing. They sounded harried, rushing to beat the holiday clock. I identified myself as the actual owner and the deployed military service member, the representative, immediately nervous, confirmed two things that hit me like a physical blow. First, that Derek Holcomb, the agent, had indeed failed to disclose the federal protection afforded to me under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. And second, that the buyers, the Wards, had already started moving boxes and furniture into the garage. They were nesting in my house. I picked up the rental SUV outside the Denver airport as the full blizzard hit Colorado, turning the windshield into a churning mass of white. The final 2-hour drive to Maple Ridge was a terrifying white-knuckle crawl. In the deadening silence of the rental car, only the wipers squeaking against the sleet. I played back Mark's old voicemails. They were from months ago, before the HELOC, before the discovery. "Hey, sweetie. Just calling to say I'm proud of you. Stay safe out there, okay? Love you. Dad." His voice was warm, casual, loving. These warm echoes were immediately followed by the chilling ping of incoming emails, notices of late payments on the fraudulent loan, warnings about the rapidly maxing out credit line, the cold reality of the financial devastation he had wrought while playing the concerned father. The snow was thick and relentless, making every turn a blind guess. As I finally rounded the bend leading down to Silver Pine Lake, the darkness was momentarily broken by a blinding burst of light. My house. My house was illuminated like a floodlit stage, shining with hundreds of Christmas lights and glowing windows. Strange cars were parked haphazardly along the street. It was a beacon of family warmth and holiday cheer, and it hit me with the force of an actual explosion. The sheer, naked theatricality of their betrayal. This party wasn't just a party. It was a victory lap. A wave of nausea washed over me, a gut-deep realization that was far worse than any fear I'd ever felt hanging off a cable in a hurricane. I was more afraid of walking into that room than of plunging into the freezing ocean. I visualized the scenarios, me screaming, Mark pleading, Lena recording everything. I can't do this. I can't break down in front of them. But I had a duty to myself. I remembered Commander Reynolds' words. Resolve what you can. I was trained to control my breathing, to regulate my heart rate, to speak with precision when a single misstep meant death. I stopped the SUV 2 houses down from mine, turning off the engine and the headlights. The only sound was the snow hissing against the hot metal. I took a deep, centering breath, inhaling the cold, clean air. I systematically stripped the emotional scripts from my mind. No begging, no wailing, no collapse. I would use the exact same tone I used to brief a panicked survivor, calm, factual, and utterly unwavering. I grabbed the black folder and my phone. The laughter and the clinking glasses drifted faintly down the snowy street. I walked toward the light, toward the familiar red door, toward the party that was, in reality, my own execution. They thought I was walking into their celebration. They didn't know I was bringing the only thing more volatile than a live grenade, an incontrovertible pile of paper evidence. I pushed open the front door and stepped onto my floor. The Christmas party roared back to life after my entrance, fueled by Mark's performance. He held the expensive cut crystal glass high, the cheap champagne catching the twinkle of the 12-foot pine. He didn't just announce the sale, he narrated it, framing himself as the selfless hero of a morality tale. "It's about priorities, folks," Mark declared, his voice thick with emotion. Fake, practiced emotion. "Cassidy, she's a hero, but she doesn't need this much house. It was just extra equity sitting there. Lena, she was caught in a debt trap from the algorithms, a victim of circumstance, a good father." He paused, looking directly at me, daring me to protest. "Sells the unnecessary to save the vulnerable." Lena, in her shimmering red dress, nodded furiously. Her phone trained on me. She was doing her live commentary, turning my life-altering trauma into an interactive poll. "See that reaction, guys?" she whispered to the camera, audible in the sudden hush. "That's the face of a big sister learning a hard lesson. This is my storyline, and Cassidy's just playing the supporting role." She was banking on this drama to recover her dwindling engagement, confidently leveraging my pain for her bottom line. I let them finish. I waited until the nervous, forced laughter died down, until Mark lowered his glass, smug in his perceived victory. The wards, the buyers, were already trying to smile and pretend the transaction was normal. I took the 3 steps into the center of the living room. I didn't shout. I didn't even raise my voice above a standard conversational volume, but the sheer, unwavering stillness of my delivery cut through the room's atmosphere like a blade. "You've all finished laughing, then?" I asked, meeting Mark's triumphant gaze. "Good." I took the black folder from my duffel bag and placed it squarely on the coffee table, next to a bowl of stale pretzels. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was startlingly loud. "I'm sorry to correct the narrative, Dad," I continued, my voice betraying my emotion. "But the house remains officially in my name, and what you have just announced, in front of 30 witnesses, isn't a noble fatherly sacrifice. It's a series of actions: laundering Lena's debt, fraudulent use of a durable power of attorney, concealing a $160,000 HELOC from the buyers, and violating several federal laws regarding military property, all of which leads directly to criminal charges." The word criminal landed with the finality of a gavel. The forced cheer immediately dissipated. The crowd, who had moments ago been ready to toast Mark, started shuffling their feet, looking for the nearest exit. I didn't let them move. I turned to Tessa and Brody Ward, the unfortunate couple who believed they had bought my security. They were frozen on my sofa, the stain from the spilled coffee spreading darkly on the floor beside them. "Tessa, Brody, you gave my father and his agent, Derek Holcomb, a $90,000 non-refundable deposit," I said, pointing at the contract summary I had printed. "That money is collateral. If the sale collapses due to fraud or non-disclosure on the seller's side, specifically concealing a pre-existing lien and using a stolen identity, you get that $90,000 back, plus penalty fees and legal costs from the seller." Brody, a large man who looked like a construction foreman, went pale. He finally understood. This was not a simple transaction. This was a poisoned well. He confessed to Tessa that the deposit was his entire inheritance from his mother, a lifetime of savings, gone in a single, fraudulent act. Mark and Derek had convinced him they could save him money by moving fast and cutting the usual title searches short. They never once mentioned the fraudulent HELOC I was now responsible for, or the powerful federal protections that rendered the entire contract void. The crowd spun on its axis. The whispers started instantly. Fraud. Felony. Prison time. They were no longer discussing Mark's selflessness, but his imminent downfall. Lena exploded, shattering the fragile silence. She slammed her phone down on the sofa cushion, forgetting her live audience. "Cassidy, you are overreacting," she shrieked, the sequins shaking with her fury. "It's creative financing, not fraud. We were going to fix it. You're going to drag your own family through the mud over some paperwork? I didn't dignify the accusation with a direct response. Instead, I pulled out my phone. This is an audio recording of a call I made 3 days ago to the bank's debt recovery department, I announced. I asked them to explain the HELOC that was opened without my knowledge. I pressed play. The crackling audio filled the suddenly silent room. A calm, professional voice from the bank explained, "The home equity line of credit, loan number 7734, was opened for $160,000. Payments are 3 months delinquent. The signature was confirmed via a durable power of attorney, which the agent, Mark Burns, claimed was necessary due to the account holder's status as an active-duty Skywatch service member, meaning she couldn't sign in person." The voice paused, then delivered the legal sting. "We specifically noted the lack of in-person verification and the use of the deployment status to speed up the process. This is currently flagged for internal review." Mark, cornered, tried to regain control, waving his hands frantically, suddenly looking desperate instead of heroic. "It was a misunderstanding, Cassidy. I intended to pay it all back," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "As soon as Lena's brand took off, we were going to clear the entire thing. I thought you'd understand. Honey, family shares." "Family doesn't share by stealing," I said flatly, pulling the audio plug out of my phone. "Family doesn't open $160,000 lines of credit against someone who is literally hanging from a wire over the Arctic Ocean." The mood in the room had fallen completely. Mariah Carey had stopped playing. Tessa was openly weeping, and Brody was shouting, not at me, but at Mark and Derek Holcomb, who had just materialized from the kitchen. Brody yelled he was calling his own lawyer first thing in the morning. He looked at Mark as if he were a dangerous stranger. I closed the black folder. The finality of the action was unmistakable. "The Christmas party is over," I concluded, addressing the stunned assembly. "The title company is already flagging the transaction due to the fraud I reported. Tomorrow morning, the banks, the district attorney, and the lawyers will be moving faster than any of you can imagine." I picked up my duffel bag, zipped my flight suit back up, and walked back towards the front door, leaving the house exactly as I had entered it, with my life still hanging in the balance. Behind me, the dam broke. I heard Lena's desperate, high-pitched scream of betrayal mixing with Mark's low, frantic defense to the neighbors. They were left to drown in the consequences of their own spectacular, public downfall. The morning after the party, the town of Maple Ridge was quiet, draped in a fresh blanket of snow. I sat at a small, unassuming cafe downtown, the window giving me a clear view of the partially frozen river. The smell of strong coffee and ozone was a welcome relief from the stale champagne and fear of the night before. Spread across the small table were the tools of my new trade: 3 color-coded binders, red for the fraudulent HELOC and bank documents, blue for the county title records and Derek Holcomb's non-disclosures, and black for the personal correspondence, the endless, manipulative texts from Mark and Lena. It looked less like a coffee meeting and more like a tactical briefing. Tessa and Brody Ward arrived 15 minutes late, their faces etched with the sleepless horror of realizing their life savings were tied up in a felony. They sat down heavily, their movements stiff. "We barely slept," Tessa whispered, pulling her coat tight. He was still trying to convince the neighbors it was just a hiccup. Lena was screaming on the phone to someone about defamation. Brody's eyes were bloodshot. He recounted how Mark's manipulation had been subtle and prolonged. Mark had given them the garage code weeks ago, urging them to start moving small items, tools, seasonal decorations, to get a head start and feel close to their new home. He had even encouraged a selfie in front of the sold sign for their social media, making them feel like part of the family celebration. They were props in his elaborate performance of legitimacy. I let them talk, absorbing the full extent of Mark's psychological fraud. When they finished, I slid the red binder across the table. I didn't offer sympathy. I offered strategy. "Here is the reality of your situation," I stated, my voice professional, detached. "The closing is halted. But the problem isn't. You have two choices. Choice 1. You accept the contract is void. You lose the $90,000 deposit to endless legal wrangling, and you walk away, hoping your life savings aren't tied up for 2 years in escrow. I paused, letting the weight of the amount settle. Brody flinched. Choice 2, I continued, tapping the red binder. You join me in a lawsuit against Mark Burns, Lena Burns, and the real estate agent, Derek Holcomb. We sue for fraud, abuse of power of attorney, and real estate violation. We use all the evidence I collected, the bank statements, the HELOC fraud, the non-disclosure of the Service Members' Civil Relief Act protections, to prove criminal intent. This ensures your $90,000 is returned, and you receive punitive damages, attorney's fees, and compensation for your emotional distress. Tessa leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She confessed that she had once admired Lena's online persona, thinking becoming neighbors with a supposed successful influencer was a dream come true. Now, she felt utterly cheapened, a mere sacrificial lamb in the background of someone else's toxic script. Brody initially hesitated. A lawsuit, against family. That's harsh. Cassidy, isn't there a cleaner way? He was still holding on to the archaic idea that family disputes should remain private. Mark is not family. Brody, I countered, setting my coffee cup down with a quiet thud. Mark is an opportunist. He viewed me as a paycheck and you as collateral. He sacrificed my future to save Lena's image, and he would have left you homeless to cover his tracks. If you let him off, he will simply do this to the next person who shows him loyalty or trust. Letting him go is not forgiveness. It's enabling future victims. I then placed my phone between us and dialed Mara, putting her on speakerphone. Mara, ever the legal machine, gave us a concise, chilling rundown of the state statutes. She detailed the specific state laws regarding the misuse of power of attorney for self-dealing, explaining that Mark's liability was both personal and financial. She outlined the potential penalties: forced restitution of the full amount of the HELOC, staggering attorney's fees, and severe fines from the state licensing board for Derek. Cassidy is your star witness. Mara's voice crackled slightly through the speaker. She has the paper trail and the narrative. She is willing to sign a full affidavit, provide all the text messages, and testify in any civil or criminal proceeding. This isn't just about revenge, wards. This is about cleaning up a massive, high-level financial crime that Mark perpetrated from inside your circle of trust. I looked at the wards. I am not asking for revenge, I reiterated. I am asking for consequence. I am asking you to help me shut down the source of the disaster. After the call, Brody quietly picked up the binders, sorting through the tabs marked with my handwriting. The anger had finally replaced his shock. He saw that Mark hadn't protected anyone. He had simply used everyone. Tessa and Brody stood up, their faces resolved. They took the copies of the evidence and the referral card for a lawyer Mara had sent. We're meeting an attorney at 1 o'clock, Brody stated, his voice now firm. Thank you, Cassidy. You just saved us from complete financial ruin. I watched them walk out, their steps steady despite the heavy weight of the files they carried. I looked down at my own hands, resting on the tabletop. They were steady, calm, the way they were when I secured a rescue cable to a terrified soul caught in a storm surge. This time, I had chosen to rescue myself, and in doing so, I had pulled 2 innocent people out of the swirling wake of my family's betrayal. I sent a quick, victorious text to Mara. The wards are in. File the injunction and the civil suit ASAP. Meanwhile, blocks away, back at the Silver Pine Lake House, Mark was desperately pacing the perimeter. His phone was ringing incessantly with calls he couldn't face. The bank, the HELOC recovery department, the nervous, aggressive buyer's agent. He was trying to project an air of normalcy to the neighbors, fiddling with the Christmas lights, but his eyes were darting nervously. Derek Holcomb, the agent, was alone in his office, frantically scouring his emails. He was looking for any loophole, any phrase that would remove him from the liability of the failed closing. trying to untangle a contract that had been rotten with fraud from the first signature. A moment later, my phone vibrated with an incoming text from Mara. It wasn't a message. It was an image. It was a screenshot of the draft civil complaint, officially filed with the court. At the bottom, under the heading Defendants, were the names Mark Burns and Lena Burns. My name, Cassidy Burns, was prominently listed under key witness and complainant. The legal machine was turning. My silent war had just become a matter of public record. The fallout was swift and devastating, a financial domino effect triggered by the simple act of disclosure. Within 72 hours of the Christmas Eve confrontation, the legal letters started arriving at the Silver Pine Lake House. They were thick, official envelopes that smelled faintly of sterile paper and high-stakes litigation. The bank that had provided the fraudulent home equity line of credit, alarmed by the internal flag and my affidavit about the abuse of the durable power of attorney, sent a massive notification demanding acceleration of the loan. Mark had 30 days to pay back the full $160,000, or they would initiate foreclosure proceedings. The stack of unopened envelopes piled high on the reclaimed hardwood floor, right where Tessa's coffee mug had shattered. Simultaneously, the civil suit filed by the ward's lawyer landed on Mark and Lena's doorstep. It was a brutal, detailed complaint that didn't just seek the return of the $90,000 deposit. It demanded an additional $200,000 in punitive damages, legal fees, and emotional distress compensation. The document cited my affidavit extensively, drawing a clear line from Mark's need to save Lena's online image to the calculated fraud against the wards. The local news quickly picked up the story. The Maple Ridge Chronicle ran a front-page article. Decorated rescue diver almost loses home to family fraud, juxtaposing my honorable service record with the shocking details of the HELOC abuse. For Lena, the consequence was immediate and existential. Her carefully constructed digital facade began to crumble. Her brand, built on aspiration and manifest abundance, was dependent on the belief that she was already successful. The court documents, being public record, were quickly discovered by a prominent anti-influencer Dramageddon account. The account posted the public court filing, detailing the exact figures of her personal debt, the amounts she owed Mark, and the timeline of her luxurious spending, all paid for by the Skywatch income. Lena, true to form, tried to turn the crisis into content. She posted a tearful, dramatically filtered video, claiming she was misunderstood, a victim of circumstance, and had simply trusted the wrong people, her words carefully avoiding any direct mention of me. But her followers were now armed with facts. The comment section was a feeding frenzy, universally asking how she could spend $10,000 on a designer purse while her sister was risking her life to pay her bills. Her carefully curated sponsorship contracts, a few for fast fashion, one for a dubious crypto brand, were swiftly terminated. Her entire livelihood vaporized within 48 hours. Mark, cornered and desperate, tried the emotional approach one last time. He found me on the street, parked awkwardly on the snowy curb near a neighbor's driveway. He looked years older, his expensive coat now looking shabby, his confidence completely gone. "Cassidy, please, just listen," he pleaded, his voice ragged. "Give me one more chance to fix this. It's Christmas. For God's sake. I only did it for Lena. I had to protect her from that debt, or she would have been out on the street." I stood on the snowy sidewalk, feeling the cold seep into my boots, my face expressionless. I had faced this man, this version of my father, in court papers and audio recordings. The emotional appeal no longer registered. "You didn't protect Lena, Dad," I said, my voice low and factual. "You enabled her until she almost took us all down, and you didn't do this for me. The only person you considered an instrument was me, the one who goes out into the storm, the one who sends the danger pay home. You burned through 2 years of my life's work just to prove you were a good father to the other daughter." He started spiraling, desperately grasping at straws. "I'll sign over the old rental unit, the truck, whatever equity is left. Just don't testify. We can settle. I'll give you everything. I held up my hand, stopping his torrent of offers. I knew Mara's caution. Accepting any transfer of assets now would be legally interpreted as a sweetener, a bribe to secure my silence, turning me from victim to co-conspirator in the cover-up. No, Dad, I said, simply, the time for family negotiations is over. This is a matter for the court to resolve now. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the sleet, a desperate, broken man. The social media backlash against Lena became a full-blown reckoning. Old friends who had tolerated her behavior now unfollowed her en masse. A video went viral, a split screen. On the left, Lena posing in a new, sparkly dress, bragging about an expensive dinner. On the right, the date of my last hazardous duty payroll deposit. The parasitic nature of her existence was laid bare for the world to see. Meanwhile, the ripple effect hit Derek Holcomb. He received a formal notice from the State Real Estate Licensing Commission announcing an open investigation into his professional conduct. They were specifically looking into his failure to flag military service protections and his handling of properties with undisclosed, overlapping mortgages. The risk of losing his license, his only source of income, was now terrifyingly real. The conclusion of the day found Mark sitting alone in the dark kitchen of the house he no longer owned. The fake Christmas lights still tangled and depressing on the window. The phone receiver was cold in his hand. He listened to the voicemail from his own frantic lawyer, who used the word bankruptcy for the first time. Mark finally understood. This was not a debt he could sweet-talk his way out of, a family crisis he could manage with a theatrical speech, or a mistake he could simply refund. This was a legal storm that was going to strip him clean, leaving him with nothing but the truth. He had gambled my future and lost everything, including his own. The sequence of legal proceedings that followed was a cold, precise operation, executed by the state and the courts, with me serving as the key instrument of truth. The first major confrontation occurred at the Chapter 7 bankruptcy creditors meeting. Mark, drowning under the accelerated HELOC debt and the threat of the ward's lawsuit, had filed for bankruptcy hoping to wipe the slate clean. The meeting was held in a stark beige government building. I sat in the back row, wearing a simple black suit, my arms crossed, watching Mark play his final performance, the confused old tradesman, overwhelmed by paperwork. He stammered, claiming he only took the HELOC because he didn't understand the terms and thought the money was a short-term, high-interest loan he could pay off quickly. The bankruptcy trustee, a sharp-eyed woman armed with Mara's meticulously compiled file, which included my affidavit and the ward's civil complaint, was having none of it. She bypassed the standard questions and zeroed in on the fraud. Mr. Burns, can you explain why the $160,000 home equity line of credit was opened using a durable power of attorney that explicitly restricted you from self-dealing while your daughter, Chief Burns, was on active duty? The trustee asked, her voice dry and prosecutorial. Mark's initial confidence evaporated. He tried to pivot, claiming Cassidy had given him verbal permission for the sale, but the trustee immediately cut him off. Verbal permission is irrelevant. Mr. Burns, the public record shows you executed the sale contract and took a $90,000 deposit from a third party while actively concealing the HELOC you opened. Furthermore, your bank statements show withdrawals from the HELOC matching the dates of your daughter, Lena Burns's, luxury expenditures, expenses she publicly claimed were necessary for her professional career. Was Chief Burns's primary residence essentially being treated as a personal ATM for your other daughter? Mark stammered, contradicting himself repeatedly, digging his hole deeper with every denial. The trustee quickly moved to the recommendation to convert Mark's remaining assets, the second rental house, the heavy-duty workshop, the extra pickup truck, into liquid assets to pay creditors. He would be left with minimal exempt property and a tiny residual income. The court was effectively stripping him bare. Next came the most public spectacle, the Real Estate Commission's license revocation hearing against Derek Holcomb. I attended, sitting silently in the gallery, my presence a constant, icy weight on the proceedings. The commission's investigator presented a damning pattern of misconduct. Holcomb had skipped crucial title searches, failed to report the fraudulent HELOC, and actively encouraged Mark to use my military deployment status as a fast track to closing. Derek, red-faced and panicked, attempted to throw Mark entirely under the bus, claiming he was merely an unwitting accomplice and that he had no idea about the limitations on the power of attorney or that I was serving overseas. I didn't have to speak. The investigator simply displayed the printed emails, a chain where I, prior to deployment, had explicitly told Derek, copied to Mark, that the POA was solely for taxes and utilities, and that I was leaving on a non-communicative, high-risk assignment. Derek's denial was rendered a public lie. The commission panel voted unanimously to immediately revoke Derek Holcomb's license, effective that day. They further recommended that the file be turned over to the district attorney for consideration of criminal fraud charges. A local news camera crew, tipped off by Mara, filmed Derek as he slunk out the side door, his career over. The civil lawsuit brought by Tessa and Brody was the final piece of the legal puzzle. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the devastating testimony from the bankruptcy trustee hearing, and the imminent threat of a jury awarding massive punitive damages, Mark and Lena finally capitulated. They agreed to a settlement that was financially annihilating. Mark agreed to the full repayment of the ward's $90,000 deposit, plus all their legal fees, ensuring he would be entirely reliant on his minimal exempt assets. Lena, having burned through her cash and lost her sponsorships, was forced to sign a long-term personal promissory note to the wards, effectively burying her under a debt that would take 10 years to clear. Forcing her to find a real job, the sale of the house was officially declared null and void, and the HELOC, though technically still on my record, was frozen and designated for immediate settlement from Mark's remaining liquidated assets. Lena's public humiliation reached its peak when an international entertainment news show, which had once praised her as a visionary entrepreneur, ran a segment on the settlement. The broadcast ran a clip of her old, ecstatic thank you speech next to a brutal, on-screen chyron. Fraud settlement, Burns v. Burns, influencer drains sister's life savings. Her online relevance was completely replaced by infamy. Throughout the entire grueling process, the meetings, the testimonies, the cross-examinations, I never lost my composure. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I offered no dramatic emotional narrative. I answered every question with the precise date, the exact document, the undisputed fact. I let the legal system, the machine designed for objective truth, do the work. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to be the shield for my dysfunctional family and allowed the consequences to fall where they belonged. Stepping out of the final court hearing, the winter sun was cold and bright on my face. Reporters called my name, their microphones thrust forward, seeking a soundbite of triumph or rage. I ignored them, walking with a straight, purposeful stride toward the white SUV parked across the street. Mara was leaning against the passenger door, 2 steaming coffee cups in her hand. She offered me one. "It's over, Cass," she said quietly. "The house is secure. The HELOC is being dissolved, and the wards were fully repaid. Justice was served. Legal fees were paid by the defendants." She then reached into her pocket and pulled out a key ring. It held a single, shiny key. "These," she said, handing them over, "are the new keys to Silver Pine Lake. The old ones were formally surrendered by Mark's lawyer, your home." I took the keys, their weight solid and real in my hand. It was the weight of ownership, of security, and of a life I had fought the storm to save. I stood in the center of the Silver Pine Lake house, the house I had legally reclaimed, and felt only profound emptiness. It was too clean, too loud with the memory of the betrayal, too much a stage for Mark and Lena's final, desperate act. It wasn't a home. It was a crime scene of trust. I knew I couldn't stay. Reclaiming it was necessary for justice. Living in it would have been torture. I hired a reputable, local agent, one whom Mara had vetted thoroughly, and asked her to sell the property quickly. But ethically, I didn't want a rush job. I wanted a clean slate. We found the perfect buyers, a young military couple, transferring to the area, starting their own life with their own hard-earned savings. Selling it to them felt like an act of cleansing, a final exorcism of the fraud that had poisoned the deed. The sale closed seamlessly. 6 weeks later, I used a significant portion of the proceeds to completely clear the remaining fees, the late penalties, and all residual legal costs associated with the fraudulent HELOC. Making sure my credit rating was pristine, the house had cost me emotional currency, but I refused to let it cost me financial stability. The remaining balance, a substantial figure, finally clean and entirely mine, I donated a generous portion of it to a foundation Mara worked with, which provided temporary housing assistance for rescue and emergency personnel facing financial crises. It was my way of ensuring my danger pay finally went to protect the people who truly deserved it. I moved into a small, third-floor apartment downtown, overlooking the icy river I had seen from the cafe. It was tiny, with no yard to worry about, no grand staircase, and most importantly, no shared memories. The rent was reasonable, and the views were wide. I had a narrow balcony just big enough for 2 folding chairs, and an overwhelming sense of starting over. I didn't share the keys with anyone. It was mine, entirely and unequivocally. The first act of internal reconstruction was simple administration. I changed my cell phone number, purging the toxic cycle of unexpected manipulative calls. I formally updated my emergency contact information at the Skywatch office, replacing Mark with Mara on all my financial and insurance documents. I removed Mark and Lena entirely from the beneficiary lists. In their place, I listed my closest workmates, the ones who had hung 50 feet below a helo with me, the ones who had pulled me from the icy churn of the ocean. They were my chosen kin. A few months later, the fallout continued. A short, grainy video clip appeared on a local news report. A brief update on the financial fraud case. In the background, there was a public phone booth outside a shabby temporary housing complex. The man inside, his shoulders slumped in a coat that was too thin for the weather, was Mark. He was trying to dial my old number. The line simply failed to connect, signaling the final, unbridgeable distance between us. Mark was serving out his probationary sentence for minor fraud charges and desperately trying to bargain his way back into a life that was gone. Lena's descent was broadcast one pitiful video at a time, stripped of sponsorships and forced to make regular, painful payments from her meager freelance income to pay off the ward's settlement. She was liquidating her assets. The montage of her life now was tragic. The expensive ring lights and backdrops were sold off on local listings. Her videos became progressively more desperate, unfiltered, tear-streaked apologies that only served to highlight her lack of genuine remorse. Her view counts plummeted from the hundreds of thousands to barely 3 digits. The attention she craved had turned into scorn, and now, indifference. My new apartment slowly filled with the things I truly wanted. A vintage record player found in a thrift store, its music warm and crackling, a simple jade plant, gifted by a former crewmate, sitting on the wide windowsill, a framed photograph of my entire rescue team huddled on a frozen dock, smiling in exhaustion. They were all small things, earned and given with genuine affection, entirely unburdened by my family's financial sins. Then came Christmas Eve, the first in my new, unpolluted space. A loud knock interrupted my quiet evening. When I opened the door, 3 of my Skywatch comrades, Mara, Jake, and Maya, stood there, beaming, holding overflowing paper bags. They had brought an entire holiday feast: turkey rolls, mashed potatoes, and enough cheap beer to last 2 days. "We figured you shouldn't be alone on your first Christmas in the new fortress," Jake announced, setting down a tiny 3-foot artificial Christmas tree. Mara held up a small, lopsided star cut from a bent piece of aluminum. "Maya managed to salvage this from a busted rotor blade," she joked. "New tradition. We build our own damn tree." We cooked in the impossibly small kitchen, bumping elbows and laughing. We ate standing up around the counter, telling the old stories of near-fatal rescues and absurd close calls. We talked about everything except the lawsuit, the wards, Mark, or Lena. More importantly, I felt no compulsion, no deep, internal need to bring them up. They were irrelevant. As the clock neared midnight, the hour that had started the collapse a year ago, I found myself standing by the balcony door. The snow was falling straight down now, quiet and steady, without the violent, chaotic swirling of a storm. Behind me, the apartment was warm and alive with the sound of my friends, my chosen family, laughing. And for the first time, I realized that this profound stillness wasn't the isolation of being alone. It was the absolute, unshakable peace of being free. It was late December, and the cold was turning the river outside my window to slate gray. A thick envelope, officially stamped by Mark's bankruptcy lawyer, arrived in my small mailbox. I brought it inside and placed it on the counter, immediately recognizing the heavy emotional writing that covered the single enclosed letter. It was a handwritten plea from Mark, labeled Final Mediation Consideration. He wanted me to intercede, to ask Mara to lessen some of the court-imposed restrictions on him, to give him a cleaner restart. The letter was a tapestry of excuses. The pressure, the grief over losing his old life, the impossible burden of raising a struggling child. I sat at my kitchen table, the bright, cold winter light making the dust motes dance. I read every line. He mourned the loss of the workshop, the retirement funds, the easy life. He never once, in 3 pages of text, acknowledged that I had almost lost my home and my future because of his calculated actions. The ultimate gaslighting was reserved for the end. Mark wrote, "Deep down, you know what family means. Cassidy, it means forgiveness. Please, just help your father." I finished the paragraph and gently folded the letter, creasing the paper precisely along its original folds. I didn't feel the surge of familiar anger or the pang of filial guilt. I felt nothing but a quiet certainty. I walked over to the small, fireproof safe where I now kept my most important documents, my rescue medals, my Skywatch deployment papers, and the final, signed court orders that had dismantled my family. I didn't burn the letter or shred it. I simply placed it on top of the stack of legal documents, closed the heavy door, and spun the combination lock. I accepted that some stories don't need to be read again to be definitively over. That evening, the third-floor apartment was bursting at the seams. My chosen family had arrived for our new Christmas celebration. The rescue team, Jake, Maya, Mara, were all there. And to my surprise, Tessa and Brody Ward, the couple who had bought my old house, showed up with a huge pot of chili and a stack of folding chairs. The party was chaotic, noisy, and utterly genuine. We were crowded around a single plastic folding table, trading hilarious stories about terrible dating experiences and near misses on rescue calls. Tessa and Brody beamed as they made a surprise announcement. They were expecting a baby, due in the early fall. They planned to raise their child in the Silver Pine Lake House, the home that had been nearly corrupted by fraud, but was now filled with genuine love, hand-me-down furniture, and the hope of a true family. I grabbed a small, unmarked envelope from my pocket and handed it to the Wards. Inside was a cashier's check, drawn from the last remaining proceeds of the sale of Mark's old workshop tools. It was a substantial amount, enough to cover the interest they had lost while their deposit was tied up. Tessa and Brody looked at the amount, stunned. I shrugged. "Buy a proper flagpole if you want to," I told them, nodding toward their soon-to-be home. "Otherwise, just keep the sky empty. It's lighter that way." As the clock ticked toward midnight, Mara, standing precariously on a folding chair, held the tiny metal star, the one cut from the helicopter blade, up to me. I reached up and gently placed it atop the small, slightly crooked artificial tree. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Everyone raised their paper cups, not filled with champagne, but cheap whiskey and instant hot chocolate. We toasted, not to revenge or justice, but to boundaries. I raised my cup. "To boundaries," I said, looking at the assembled faces. To the simple truth that love without respect is just obligation, and sometimes, the bravest rescue you can make is pulling yourself off a sinking ship that your family deliberately tried to scuttle. The truth settled softly in the room, understood by everyone. The story closes as I step onto the tiny balcony for the last time that night, the cold hitting my face like a clean shock. I look down at the warm lights reflecting on the frozen river. Behind me, my real family, the people who had chosen to spend their time, their money, and their holiday with me, were laughing. The faint, echoing, toxic memory of that other Christmas Eve faded. Not because I forgave what they did, but because they no longer had the power to write the next chapter of my life. The story was finally mine to keep. Thank you so much for listening to Cassidy's story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on her journey to justice. Don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people hear this amazing true story.